Whenever anyone opposes the legalization of marijuana, they're challenged to back up their opposition with recent science. Okay, challenge accepted. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is BreakPoint. The pitfalls and perils of marijuana legalization are well documented, but whenever we discuss that research here on BreakPoint, we're accused of not having the right research. Of course, what that means is that we've used studies that contradict the very vocal advocates of weed. Well, let's see what happens when we cite the British journal The Lancet, which, along with the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association, it's considered the gold standard for peer-reviewed medical research. It doesn't get more real than being published in The Lancet. A just-published study in The Lancet involving, among others, researchers at King's College London compared 900 people who'd been treated for psychosis with 1,200 people who had not. Sample participants were drawn from across Europe and Brazil. Both groups were surveyed on a host of factors, including their use of marijuana and other drugs. The study's authors concluded that people who smoked marijuana on a daily basis were 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis compared with people who never used the drug. For those who used high-potency marijuana daily, the risk jumped to nearly 5 times. Now, by high potency, the researchers meant marijuana with a THC content of more than 10%. To put that figure in context, a study of the weed seized by the DEA between 1995 and 2014 found that the THC content went from about 4% in 1995 to 12% in 2014. Well, today it's not uncommon to read of marijuana legally sold in places like Colorado with THC content above 20%, occasionally 30%. Legalization advocates minimize the exponential growth in potency by saying that 20 or more years ago, Americans didn't have access to, quote-unquote, the good stuff. Well, that misses the point by several astronomical units. The point is that those people who daily use the good stuff are 5 times more likely to find themselves in a hospital suffering from delusions and hallucinations, to name only 2 of the symptoms of psychosis. Now, critics will respond, well, that's correlation, not causation. And that's the criticism that's been leveled at journalist Alex Berenson, author of Tell Your Children, The Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence, a book I recommend highly. But as I heard Berenson say just last week in Denver, of course it's correlation, not causation. The only way to prove causation is to ask half a sample group to experiment with something that may harm them. That's not ethically possible. By the way, all the studies that made us believe that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, those were correlated studies too. And that was enough to convince all of us. Even so, writer Ron Powers doesn't need a peer-reviewed study to convince him of the link between marijuana use and psychosis. In his 2017 book, Nobody Cares About Crazy People, he tells a moving story about his own 2 sons, Dean and Kevin, both diagnosed with schizophrenia in their late teens. As Powers tells readers, while there's a strong genetic component to schizophrenia, there's no schizophrenia gene. Instead, it's a constellation of genetic and environmental factors that make people susceptible to schizophrenia. One of these, as Powers painfully learned, heavy marijuana use, especially in the teenage years. Of course, some people will tell you that they and most people aren't mentally ill, so there's little, if any, risk. But for a host of reasons, no one knows that with certainty. In fact, all pronouncements about how safe marijuana legalization is simply overstates the case. That's exactly what happened here in Colorado. The possible pitfalls were denied and downplayed, and so Colorado now holds the dubious distinction of leading the country in first-time drug use. And the rate of monthly marijuana use among 18 to 25-year-olds in states with legal weed is nearly 3 times as much as states that haven't legalized it. By the way, 18 to 25, that's the age when schizophrenia often begins to manifest. And since legalization, Colorado has seen a spike in marijuana-related emergency room visits by people between the ages of 13 and 20. Given these well-documented mental health risks, especially to not fully formed adolescent brains, the rush to legalization is the height of irresponsibility. It's an irresponsibility that can shatter lives. And don't just take our word for it. For BreakPoint, I'm John Stonestreet.